Good evening. Welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring women-owned businesses from across the country. And now, for your host, Kimberly McLemore.
All right, good evening, and welcome to WSBI, your resource for success podcast program, where you get to meet inspiring entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses from across the country. I am your host, Kimberly McLemore, and welcome to a special edition of tonight's show. With us, we have Bill Abernathy. Everyone loves a good story about second chances, and that's exactly what Bill Abernathy's story is all about. The Kansas City, Missouri resident began writing songs in his early teens. He played all through his school years, but then he stopped. Life took over. Bill is a pure lyrics first writer, a bit of a storyteller. He feels like the story and lyrics talk to him and tell him what the rest of the song is supposed to sound like. His last album, 2017's Find a Way, reached number 5 on the Roots Music Report Traditional Folk Album chart, and the single Goodbye Will Never Come Again reached number 1 on the singles chart. He was also a December 2018 Billboard Magazine Emerging Artist. He recently toured the Midwest on his Living the Dream solo tour. And in November 2020, Bill released his latest single, the politically driven bluesy rocker, More Than Meets the Eye. So without further ado, please help me welcome to my platform, Mr. Bill Abernathy. Hey, Bill, how are you?
I'm just doing great, Kimberly, and you?
I am doing good. I am so happy to have you on with me this evening. Sir, how have you been doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. I've been running crazy, right? Every time you think life just is about to slow down and chill out, things happen. So it's been a little bit crazy for me the last 2 or 3 weeks. So I've got a construction project going on in my loft here in Kansas City, which meant that I have to move out. And so I'm living with my daughter, and I'm trying to get through the next 3 weeks of construction. So doing that, and as well, I've been at the studio all day long, working on the next tune. So, I always thought that when I retired from my 9-to-5 corporate gig, my life would get a lot quieter, but I think I work harder now than I did then, which is a little bit scary. But don't tell my old boss. Don't tell my old boss. He still thinks I was the guy, so.
Oh, well, yeah, we hope that he's not listening then, okay? Because otherwise the word is out, so it's too late. Well, Bill, like I said, welcome again to the show. And, I have obviously read a little bit more about who you were, but I'm sure there's a lot more about who Bill Abernathy is. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself personally?
Well, Kimberly, I'm really a pretty simple guy. I'm a dad. I'm a grandpa. 3 times, by the way. I have 3 grandkids. I tell a few stories. I like to play my guitar. I like to write songs. So all of those things kind of meld together into the products that we put out in the musical genre. So essentially, what I do is I tell stories about things that have happened to me, things that have happened to friends of mine, people that I know, or sometimes just a random thing that I saw, either in person or on television or something. It'll trigger an idea or two, and I'll sit down and start writing it down. So that's kind of who I am. I'm pretty simple.
Well, that's good. That's the easy way around. Okay, now we're gonna go deeper. Sorry. Okay, we're gonna dive.
One of those interviews,
yeah,
huh? Okay.
All right. Just a little bit more. Otherwise, I'd have to end my interview in like 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm ready. Whatever. Let's go.
All right. Well, awesome. No, I really just, everybody has a story. We all have our own personal stories of why we do what we do and how we end up where we're at in life. But I want to know, first of all, how many years has it been since you actually been singing? Because according to your story, obviously we know, since I read a little bit, is that, you started out, then you stopped. But how many years has it really been with the singing?
Total. So I started playing music when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I played, the typical stuff, I did church and different places. I ended up being in a traveling group from our church that went all over the United States. And played at, different youth camps and, that kind of thing. And it was fun. That was a great time. I did that up until I was probably, 14 or something like that. And then I started playing around a little bit in Kansas City. I had a group of friends that I knew through my brother that were professional musicians in the Kansas City area. And they were tolerant enough to let the little kid come and listen to them play and occasionally let me get up on stage with them, and that kind of evolved. So all through school, I played a little bit, sometimes, 2-3 nights a week, sometimes more, sometimes less, all through school. And then, I decided that actually by a physical thing, I had some problems with my voice that needed some rest. I ended up needing some surgeries, and so I couldn't really play. So, you still got to have revenue. You still got to pay the bills, right? So I went and got a job working for a big company, and with the intent of staying there about 6 months and letting my voice heal up, and keeping the bills paid, and then going back to music. And then that 6 months turned into 12. Which turned into 24, which turned into 43 and a half years. Oh, wow. And I retired from that company last November. So who knew, right? Also during that time, I got married, I had kids, did the whole family thing, building houses and doing all that stuff. And then my kids were very athletic, and so they got into playing ball, and you chase them around all over the countryside, watching them play ball and supporting what they do. And we were fortunate that both of them got to continue their athletic careers all through college. And so spent a lot of time running, across the countryside to different ball games, and enjoyed that. Wouldn't trade it for the world, but during that time, music really had to take, a back seat. Not that I actually quit playing or writing, I actually quit playing out. So, in all my homes that I've had, I've always had a little studio room, where I would go in and, spend a few quiet hours playing my guitar and try to put some thoughts down to paper. So, the rest, once the kids got out of school and got their lives underway, I had a stack of songs that I wanted to go in and try to record a little bit. So we went in and made them. A couple of those songs got picked up by, stations, radio stations and what have you around. And then we followed that one up with another album, I think, which you alluded to, which is called the Find a Way album, that charted for a couple of 2.5 years, I think, and that's the one that had our biggest hit to date, the Goodbye Will Never Come Again song. And then we followed that up with the current full album that's out, that's called Crossing Willow Creek, which is also done extremely well. And back in October, November, we released a single called More Than Meets the Eye, just as a single, because we weren't ready to release a complete project or a complete album, but we wanted to get that song out. So we released More Than Meets the Eye, and it's done well through all the different services and radio and all that stuff. And that's really why I'm talking to you today. So there you go.
know.
Yeah, there you go.
It's a lucky day, huh? So yeah, we're definitely going to be listening to that later on towards the end of the show. The thing that when I'm hearing all the conversation you just told us and all the information about yourself, I still am stuck on the 43 years. Something that you thought was going to last for 6 months turned out 43 years later. Now that's obviously saying something very well about the organization or the company that you were working with. And that takes a lot, especially when you've been playing and singing, music since you were about 6 years old, and knowing that was really the love of your life. How did the two entities kind of intertwine with themselves and then separate from themselves, even before the 43 years? How did you keep saying that, I'm going to keep holding on this just a little longer, and then I'm going to go back to this, but you never did until 43 years later?
Yeah, I think that timing in life is an interesting thing, right? And so when I started, working for this big, global conglomerate gig, um, I got lucky. A lot of times, the things that I would do or ideas that I would have would tend to want to work out. And that kind of got me moved up in the company. And essentially at the end of my career, the last 15 years of my career, I managed an organization that ran projects all over the United States and all over the globe. And, kind of pick a project. Sometimes they were IT kind of projects. Sometimes they were more manufacturing-based projects. But project management is very much like songwriting. If you really want to know, there's quite an analogy there, So you have to have an idea, right? You have to be able to script that idea and put it down in some logical form with a structure, and then kind of pull it all together. And at the end, the project that you've done, whether it be a new production facility or a new warehouse or a new IT solution, the project is really your song, right? Because you're all over it. It's part of you now. And it's not so different, really, than songwriting, where you get an idea and you just want to tell the story. And it's not so different, really.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I definitely know what it means to be a project manager. I do that during the day. So I've been doing that for almost 20 years. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, how much coffee do you drink a day? So, yeah.
Yeah, especially, I'm running like, 4 or 5 projects at one time. So it can get kind of crazy, but I do understand. You're right. It is definitely telling a story. You have, like I said, an idea, and that idea that is either given to you or either you put that idea together, and the next thing you know, you're putting all the little ingredients into it in order to make sure that project runs thoroughly through every phase until it gets complete. So it is absolutely like writing a song. But for those who don't know what it means to be an artist or how to write a song, and they may be interested, what advice would you give them on that?
It's simple. Have something to say, right? Just say it. I'm a believer and a big fan of lyrics, and it's one of the reasons that I like to do what I do from a songwriting perspective, because I think words matter, and words have a lot of strength, and they have a lot of power, and they can have a lot of impact, and probably a longer lasting impact than a really hot guitar lick in a song, And so, I always tell, younger artists, find out who you are, know what you want to say, and find a way to say that in a way in which, people will listen, and you can have an impact. I mean, that's really what it's all about. It's find yourself, be who you are.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's with anything that we do, right? Especially if if you're really in tune to, like I said, of who you are and what you want to do. And I always tell people, and part of what I train people how to do is learning how to use their voice. And because we don't realize sometimes how powerful our voice can really be until we are sometimes either pushed up against the wall and have no choice. But, but in your scenario, as a music artist, so you've been writing and been singing for many, many years. So it was kind of embedded in you in a way that you might have not known that this is what you were going to do for the rest of your life. But here you are back into the saddle again, and you've been doing that. And so, in 2020, obviously you released this new song. And so with all the pandemic things going on, was 2020 kind of the year where you really had more time to truly focus on your music?
No, not really. One would think so. Yeah, right. One would think so, right? So we went into, I got home from a business trip at the end of February of 20, and that was when it became more and more evident that we were going to go into some sort of lockdown scenario. And so, I did what everybody else did. We all did. My whole team, we took all our stuff home, all our monitors, all our work stuff, and set up our home offices and essentially worked from there until they're still working from there right now. The folks that are still with the company, and we were working in a large integration project, and it was a global thing, and people all over the world. So you were doing a lot of remote work anyway, and so it really wasn't that big a stretch, for us to to go home. But the problem with project management, and as you know, since you are a project manager, it's not necessarily a 9 to 5 job, you know. So you might be burning, a little bit of the midnight oil, doing those 12 and 16-hour days. And again, it was an international project, so you're on phone calls, at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning sometimes, you have to get in touch with all your stakeholders and all the other folks that are involved in your project. So one would sit back and think, oh, geez, quarantine, you can't get out. You got a house full of guitars. Right. What are you going to do? Well, I did write some, right? I did write some. The More Than ECI song was written in that period of time. And these, the ones that we're working on now, the other 3 that I'm going to release here for too long, were all written mostly during that time. But I was also, during that period of time preparing for my retirement, and there's stuff, there's math and financial considerations and you have to figure all that out. So, that kept me pretty busy during that time, and not only finishing up the project that I had, but also, preparing for retirement and getting all my ducks in a row and, all my T's crossed and my I's dotted. And then November 17th came, and surprisingly enough, I had my T's crossed and my I's dotted, and everything has went extremely smoothly. I was a bit of a workaholic, a little, I used to do the really long hours and all that. And a friend of mine asked me, they said, how are you handling this? Because, you're not that guy anymore, Right. And I said, well, it's what's really nice about it, to be honest with you, is to have the time to do the things that you want to do the way you want to do them. Oftentimes even in our personal life, we have something to do and we go, I've only got an hour to do this in, so I'm just going to bang it out and move on, as opposed to, maybe taking a little bit of a step back and just saying, hey, what could I do really cool with this? And then, you invest more and more time and you get cooler things at the end, you come up with better solutions. So, so I think I'm busier now than I was when I was working for a living. So just saying.
Well, like we say, we do make our choices. So, but I also want to talk a little bit more though about the business of being in music. Everybody, doesn't realize that when you're a music artist, that it's not just about singing. You do need to have an understanding of the industry, why it's a business, and how important it is to understand that. So, talk a little bit to the listeners about the business aspect of being a musician.
Well, I think to be, a successful musician in today's world, you have to have a bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, right? Because what you're going to do musically is not cookie cutter to what somebody else is doing musically, and so, you do some obvious things, right? To me, they're obvious things. So, I set up a little LLC for my music stuff and for all my publishing and all that stuff that I have a little bit of a structure, know what you want to do. Like, for example, I've got some friends and they're great friends and they're great musicians. And I'm not saying anything negative about this at all, but they really like playing in bars. They enjoy that. Mm-hmm. I don't, there's nothing about playing in a bar that I enjoy. Now I go to bars and I listen to my friends play and support them, but I'm just really not that guy. It's not, I don't like it, And so, my focus has always been, well, what do I do? What do I enjoy doing? And what adds the most value to me and to the audience? And I just do concerts, and it may be for, 15 people. It may be for 1,500. Right. But I just play concerts and tell stories and, talk about the songs and that's kind of my thing. So it advice for people, find out who you are, know who you are, and know what you want to do. And I know this is trite. I don't expect it to happen quickly. Just say it, and you play for the enjoyment of playing. And if you're doing it for any other reason, I would challenge your motives.
Right. But you know what you're saying is the truth. I mean, the bottom line is everything is organic, right? It grows when it needs to grow. As long as you're doing the right things, and you know, I like how you talked about you stepped into it as doing as an LLC because it is your business. But also in the process of
Mm-hmm.
that, you've obviously done some outsourcing. You know, obviously the way I met you was through your management that is also assisting you. So there's still the marketing side of so everything is still based on the basics when it comes to a business. And a lot of times, like I said, people are always aware that it's one thing that you can sing, but when you start selling, you know, your songs and people are and you're in concerts, all that, there's money involved. There's everything else that comes involved with that process, and you have to do it legally. You got to do it the right way. And nowadays,
Sure.
it's so easy to just step up on a platform, you know, Facebook or whatever the case may be, or Instagram, and people are just singing. You know, they're doing what they want to do. They're being heard. Some people may get found, they may not. But at the end of the day, they're doing things, and they don't always think about some of the ramifications that can come with that if you're not doing the process, the business process side of it the right way. So that's the reason why I was kind of like to dig deep into this because this is about, you know, this show is really about resources and understanding. It's not about reinventing the wheel about what we're doing. It's about realizing that you can literally use some of the same business philosophies for pretty
Mm-hmm.
much everything that you're doing, right, in business.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that you have gotten asked many times, you know, like I said, about how do you start a business when it comes to singing, or how do you just get into the music industry, period. And your advice that you've given so far is very accurate. Is there any other advice that you would like to share with the listeners about being in the industry itself as a whole?
Yeah, you alluded to it actually, and I use this in my corporate gig as well. You know, I've said you got to know who you are, right,
Mm-hmm.
and know what you want, but you've also got to know who you are not, and what you can and what you cannot do. Like for example, you know, I write songs, I play the guitar, I sing. This is what I do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I do not do my own photography. I outsource that. I do not do my own recording. I outsource that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I go into professional recording studios, and I'm not the guy sitting at the control panel, you know, because it's not my thing. You know, I
Right.
have input, you know, but you know, I think it's very important to know what you don't know, and I don't know how to do that stuff. And do I
Yeah.
really want to take the time? Do I really want to take the time to do that when I could call, you know, a million people, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's their expertise. And what's going to take them 15, 20 minutes to do is going to take me 3 weeks to figure out, and I'm still not going to get the quality. So at the end of the day, you know what you're good at, and then know what you're not.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I always like to say the best thing to do, and this was kind of my mantra in the corporate world, is uh, get the best people and get out of the way and let them do what they do, you
Right,
know,
right. The key is get out of your
because,
own way. Is
well,
the
yeah,
key,
yeah,
right?
you know, but, you know, I think a lot of times, you know, we get so wrapped up, you know, this is my baby, it's my song, it's my
Mm-hmm.
album, it's my project. I've got to manage every little nth degree. And not to say that you shouldn't have input,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, really, if you're that guy, you're Paul Simon, and you just sold your entire thing to Sony or whoever he sold his whole record portfolio to
Mm-hmm.
today for billions and billions and billions of dollars. I'm not that guy. I know that. I'm a guy with a guitar sitting on a chair in a corner of a coffee house or in a small theater. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not that guy that can do all that. And so, you know, like I said, know who you are and know who you aren't,
Right.
and don't try to be that person you aren't.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, it's the best advice, and like I said, it's really just basic business 101. And but you know, a lot of people will overstep that. They would think that they can go around it, you know, and not go through it. They just think that I don't have to do this. And like I said, the realities are ramifications for not understanding just the basic business principles that you need to have when you're coming into any type of business, whether it's a musician, artist, you know, whether you're doing artwork, whether you're opening up something else. The bottom line is that if you don't know something, don't do it. You know, find out how you can get it accomplished, outsource it, and those are the great advice that you've been giving all evening. And I think the thing I really love about your story too is the fact that you have that corporate background. You understand what it means to run a business. And when you're running projects, we know as project managers, you're not just always dealing with the project itself. You really can get involved with the music, there's excuse me, the money side of it as well. So you have a better understanding
Sure.
if I have this, $1 million, I know that this $1 million has to stretch throughout this whole project. How am I going to make that work? So you have a little
Yeah.
bit better understanding as you utilize that into your music industry side of the business. And so, you are a double threat. Okay. So.
I'm a double threat. Yeah, double threat.
I can't call you a triple threat because I'm not sure if you're dancing or anything or acting. So.
Yeah, you won't see me dancing. So nobody wants to see that. That's not a look that anybody wants to be a part of. So, yeah, no, but the point is that, you got to be prepared for about anything. I mean, even in the music world, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got to be smart, for one. Here's an example of not being smart. I did a live stream show for an organization out of Australia. They called me and they had a huge following, and they had played a bunch of my music, and it was pretty popular on the radio in their country. And they said, "Man, Bill, we want you to come. We want you to do a prime time show, Sydney, Australia, and we want it to kick off at 8:00. Just do it live stream from your home." And I thought, sure, I could do that. I've done a million of them, right? And I said, sure, done. Well, it'd be great. It'd be great. Little did I know that 8 p.m. Sydney, Australia time was 6 a.m. Kansas City time. So, I was up at 3 drinking a lot of coffee, getting ready to play. Yeah. So maybe doing the math is maybe something else you might think about. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a little bit good of advice to give, right? Yeah, the time difference
Yeah.
zone and where the country you're in. Yeah, I think it definitely can make a huge difference when it comes to completing your task for the day, right?
For sure.
Well,
For
at least
sure.
you were
Yeah.
wide awake by 6 o'clock when you were ready and roaring to go. That's for sure. So.
Well, I don't know how ready and roaring because I was still working at the time. So I got up and played a 2-hour concert, got done at 8, got on conference calls at 8:15, and it was a long day. Just saying.
Oof,
It was a long day on conference calls. Yeah.
Absolutely. But I'm sure you sounded fantastic and everything went through. So things happen for a reason. And look, and here you are. So I do want to talk a little bit though about your new song that we're going to listen to later, "The More Than Meets the Eye." It's considered to be a politically driven bluesy rocker. Talk about what you were writing and what is the purpose behind this song. I mean, we know 2020 was crazy. A lot of things happened during 2020 with the politics and everything else outside of that pandemic. There's so many things going on in our world today. So kind of give us some insight on this song, "More Than Meets the Eye."
Well, to be honest with you, it's a lesson to myself is what More Than Meets the Eye is, right? So I'm a bit of a news junkie, right? I enjoy watching the news, and I have rules about watching news on television, right? So I'm not even real sure we can call it news these days. Let's say the opinion stations, right? The opinion stations, right? But I have rules about that I change channels about every 15 minutes. Right? Because I'm not going to lock into one station, because first of all, they're not that interesting. And secondly, every station or every news outlet, whether it be a, newspaper or a magazine or whatever, they have their own tint, their own tint on things. And so I'm not that guy, so I change stations pretty regularly, and I got fascinated with the different reporting, right? And how some things that were reported on station A are never reported on station D, and vice versa. And sometimes B and C are reporting completely different things, but sometimes they're reporting the same thing as A, but it's completely different. And it was just a mess, right? It's just a mess. And we still have it today, right? And I got to thinking, because I like details, if you're in project management, you got to be into the weeds a bit, I like details. And I kept looking and going, wow. And then I thought, wait a minute, Bill, what if, right? What if you were starting a brand new project?
Well, let's see. Hopefully get Bill back here in a second. I think we lost him for a couple
project
there.
To understand it, right? More Than Meets the Eye is really an attempt to take a step back from all the stuff that's going on in the world today, right? Kind of like can't see the forest for the trees, right? You get so locked into this movement or that movement or this thing or, this story or whatever, right? That you kind of lose the vision of the overarching ideas and concepts that are going on kind of behind the scenes. And so more than meets the eye, it's really that attempt to take a step back and say, I don't care, I don't care what you believe, what religion you are. I don't care what politician, what politics you use. None of that really interests me. But I do think it's interesting that so many of the outlets, right, are saying essentially the same thing in a different way. Right. And it's fascinating to me to listen to their talking points as you go, across, particularly if you stay in one network and go to different shows on a particular network. Right. They've been told certain talking points that they have to lead off with, for example, because they're replicated on station after station after station verbatim. Right. So that kind of makes you go, maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. Maybe they're trying to change the narrative. Maybe they're trying to create their own narrative, And so I think it's a fun exercise to do, Now whether, I'm really not a conspiracy guy, but if you take a step back and you go, well, I wonder why there and why here and why is that different? It's really an interesting game. Right? Game exercise to run off in your mind to try to see, is there something behind the scenes that is being cloaked, for example? We don't really want to talk about that. Doesn't fit our narrative. Therefore, we're not going to report on that. And of course, over here, you got another station that's not going to report on something because it doesn't fit their narrative. And at the end of the day, how do you know? How do you know what's going on? Right? Yeah. And maybe, the intent is to really just perpetuate their narrative, whether it's right or wrong. Maybe that's the intent. Maybe that is the more than meets the eye. I don't know. I'd like to tell you I knew the answer. Don't. But it's certainly a good exercise to think about.
Well, I can agree with that. I definitely agree with you that the world we live in today is all about opinion. So absolutely. No. It's hard to pull out the facts. Everything's opinion based. So yeah, definitely. I don't
remember if it's the More Than Meets the Eye song, or I had another one kind of politically charged that was called Cry Wolf. And I think I actually used the words alternative facts in the song because that's what we have. There is no facts, right? They're all biased and tainted by the various narratives that are out there. But More Than Meets the Eye. I really like that too.
Well, I'm sure that we're all going to enjoy it too. Like I said, we're going to listen to it here in a few minutes. But before we end this evening, why don't you tell the listeners where they can maybe reach out to you, where they can find your music, and if you have anything new coming up, concerts or whatever that you would like to share, please share that information with us this evening.
No, I'd love to, and thank you for the opportunity. So to get a hold of me or to see some of my stuff, the best home base to go to is just my website, just billabernathy.com. And on there you can see, kind of our whole history of the different music and albums and pictures and press and, all that stuff. I have a store, so if you wanted to get something there, the stores there you can buy, real CDs if you want. And of course, our music is everywhere. You pick a service. It doesn't matter which service you're using. Our music is there, of course, Amazon and Spotify and Apple and, all those. We're out on all of those. That's really a good start from a social media perspective. I have found that my core audience, the folks that follow me, are pretty avid users of Facebook. So I have a Facebook page that's just called Bill Abernathy, singer-songwriter, and you can go there, and that's where I'll upload new shows and other things that we're doing. That's where I'll usually make an announcement of new music and that kind of stuff. So Facebook is a good place to start, but of course, all of the social media links, whether it be Instagram or Twitter or pick 'em, are all on my website. So once you go to the website, you can find everything else.
All right.
And if you Google Bill Abernathy, and I'm not the first 5 hits you get on your Google search, let me know, because I need to call Michael and talk to him about that.
Yeah, I'll let him know too, okay? Be like, Michael, you're slipping again. So we
Michael
double check
does a great job.
Yes,
No, he does a great job, and he's a good dude. So no, he does a great job. I like to mess with him about that kind of stuff. But no, he's doing a great job. It's a great example of what he does. I don't know how to do, and furthermore, I don't want to know. So get good people, get out of the way, let them do what they do. And he's done a great job for me. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, I really appreciate you coming on with me, Will. It's been a fun time. Do you have any last words for our listeners this evening?
Yeah, maybe just a word of caution. We More Than Meets the Eye, which I think you're going to play here in a few minutes, right? Talks a little bit about COVID, right, and quarantines and that kind of thing. And I know, as somebody who has had those shots, right, I know that the temptation now is going to be to kind of get a little bit lax, especially the weather's breaking, things are getting better, do us all a favor, right? And don't. Yeah, let's be smart, and this gig isn't over, and this COVID has got some things for us that I fear we haven't thought of yet. So do us all a favor, stay home, wear your mask, wash your hands, be careful, get your shots, and let's get things back. It doesn't necessarily affect me as much as it does a lot of my musician buddies, but the fact that venues have been closed for so long and are just now starting to open up with a trickle of people coming in, that's people's income, man. So we want to let that thing build and get that back where a lot of the musicians and artists around actually have a place to go to work, because right now they don't. So yeah, just be smart, use your head, think, my dad used to always have a thing that said, Bill, if you think first, the rest will come easy, right? Yeah. Well, oftentimes we forget about that whole think first thing, right? So yeah, think first and the rest will come easy. But that's what I would just tell people now. I know we've all been, in this world that we're operating in now for a long time, but a few more weeks, few more months, it isn't going to kill us. And if it makes a big impact on our society and keeps a lot of people healthier, then it's well worth it. Well worth it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that. All right. And this is the perfect segue to end the tonight's show. For those who are listening, if you're not listening to us live, you're definitely going to have to come back and re-listen to tonight's show. It's been phenomenal having Bill on. He has a ton of words of wisdom, and he talks about his great music. And I'm so excited that we're going to get the opportunity to listen to his single here soon again called More Than Meets the Eye. But before we lead down that path, please, everybody, think about what it is that you want to do here in 2021. This has kind of been my theme for the year, because obviously last year we were all kind of stuck. Some people were stuck on the mode of just not getting anything accomplished. Others were driving full steam ahead. And now we're in a new year. And some people are still thinking, what is it that you wish that you want to do? There's never anything saying that you're too old to not do what you want to do. There's time. Every day is a new beginning. So get up, do what you want to do. If you need somebody to talk to, reach out to me anytime at KimberlyWSBILC@gmail.com, and let's have a chat. Let's talk about your goals. Let's talk about your dreams, what it is you feel like you need to be. And then, of course, if you want more WSBI, you maybe want an additional podcast show, maybe some free virtual live Q&As with some of our favorite entrepreneurs. We are doing a campaign to raise $5,000 so we can provide more resources for success. You want to go to www.wsbillc.com in order to make your donation. And again, like I said, I would like to thank you all for listening to us tonight. We will be back next week with more amazing guests. Be sure to follow us on iHeartRadio, download our mobile app, or Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until then, you enjoy the rest of the evening. And as I said, I will be bringing on the song More Than Meets the Eye. Good night.
There's more to this than meets the eye. Decisions based on biased lies, determining who lives and dies, whose freedoms are lost, whose justice is blind. There's so much more to this than meets the eye. Happening around us, it's so real, so very treasonous, when the truths we hold so dear are cast into shadow. The rose-colored glasses adopted by the masses shade the truth, compelling all just to follow. The facts is there reported, so biased, so distorted by those who are paid to fabricate this illusion. False flag indoctrination running rapid through the nation, down the primrose path that's leading us to ruin. Don't you know that there's more to this than meets the eye? Decisions based on biased lies, determining who lives and dies, whose freedoms are lost, whose justice is blind. There's more to this than meets the eye. When leaders dictate sacrifice, when freedom's lost to compromise, there's so much more to this than meets the eye. The pure misinformation, the mental masturbation, where the talking heads propagate their agendas. The facts are all negotiable, their talking points disposable, all designed just to keep you fooled till this November. Don't you know that there's more to this than meets the eye? Decisions based on biased lies, determining who lives and dies, whose freedoms are lost, whose justice is blind. There's more to this than meets the eye. When leaders mandate sacrifice, when freedom's lost to compromise, there's so much more to this than meets the eye. There's more to this than meets the eye. When leaders mandate your sacrifice, when your freedom is lost to their compromise, there's so much more to this, so much more to this, so much more.